The horror began shortly after Justin's 911 call. At approximately 10:30 p.m., Justin frantically dialed emergency services, his voice trembling with fear. The dispatcher could barely make sense of his words as he described an assailant who had approached the car, shot April, and then fired at him. "My wife's been shot. I've been shot too. I don't know what happened. We were just sitting here and this guy came out of nowhere," Justin cried on the phone. According to his statement, they had been approached by a lone assailant, an armed man demanding valuables. Justin claimed he and April had complied, but then, inexplicably, the man opened fire and fled into the night. He said he had been shot in the arm but was still conscious and capable of making the call. Dear viewers, in the next video releases, you will find very intriguing and confusing cases, and in order not to miss them, be sure to subscribe to the channel and please like the video. April Barber was, by all accounts, a woman who should have had it all. Born in 1984 in Jacksonville, Florida, of a loving family who cherished her from the moment she was born. Her father, David Parks, an engineer, and her mother, Ellen, a high school teacher, had always emphasized the importance of family, education, and strong moral values. From the outside, her life appeared to be one of success and happiness. She excelled in school, where she was a star athlete, balancing academics and sports with a seemingly effortless grace. Her personality, while warm and approachable, was also defined by a quiet strength. April was the kind of person who could handle adversity with grace. In her teenage years, she had been faced with personal challenges, including the sudden death of a close family member. While many of her peers might have struggled with such a loss, April seemed to have a unique resilience. She processed the grief with maturity and used it as motivation to help others who were going through their own hardships. Her empathy and emotional intelligence made her someone people often turned to for support, and she had a reputation as a listener, a friend who could be trusted with the deepest secrets. As she grew older, she developed a love for the arts, especially photography. Her creativity extended beyond the lens, though. April was known for her kind-hearted nature, always willing to lend a hand to those in need. Whether it was volunteering at local animal shelters or tutoring younger students in mathematics, she carried a sense of responsibility and compassion that made her beloved by friends and acquaintances alike. April was the kind of person people gravitated toward. Her smile was infectious, and her personality shone brightly in every room she entered. She had a charm that made her instantly likable, someone who was both approachable and warm. By the time April reached adulthood, her future seemed limitless. She graduated with honors from college, earning a degree in business. With her education and determination, she quickly climbed the corporate ladder, landing a well-paying job in a prestigious financial firm. Her career was taking off, but it wasn't just her professional life that was flourishing. April also found happiness in her personal life. It was during her time working in Jacksonville that she met Justin Barber. Justin, like April, was ambitious. He was charming, well-spoken, and appeared to have the kind of easy confidence that April found attractive. They met at a work-related event and quickly hit it off. For Justin, April represented everything he wanted. A successful, independent woman who seemed to have it all. The two of them began dating shortly after their initial meeting, and it wasn't long before they were inseparable. Despite their differences, the couple seemed to complement each other well. April, the steady and grounded force in the relationship, balanced Justin's more impulsive nature. In early 2007, after dating for a little over a year, Justin proposed to April. It was a decision that seemed to make sense at the time. April, who had always dreamed of a family of her own, was swept up in the romance of it all. Justin, too, seemed genuinely in love with her, and they soon began planning their future together. They bought a house in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Jacksonville, and their wedding was scheduled for the summer. It was July 22nd, 2008, a warm, balmy night in Jacksonville Beach, Florida. April and Justin Barber had been looking forward to their short vacation for months. They had decided to take a break from the stress by the ocean. Justin had arranged the trip, and April, ever the optimist, hoped that the getaway might ease the tension between them. What should have been a peaceful retreat would soon become the setting for a chilling tragedy that would alter both their lives forever. That evening, The couple made their way to a quiet beachside parking lot near the shoreline. They had just finished dinner at a local seafood restaurant, and there was talk of walking along the beach under the stars. As they parked the car, Justin, the driver, slipped into the passenger seat, and the two began chatting. April, ever so trusting, sat beside him, her seatbelt still on, as they talked about their future. There was no indication that this seemingly serene moment would soon spiral into a nightmare. The horror began shortly after Justin's 911 call. At approximately 10:30 p.m., Justin frantically dialed emergency services, his voice trembling with fear. The dispatcher could barely make sense of his words as he described an assailant who had approached the car, shot April, and then fired at him. "My wife's been shot. I've been shot too. I don't know what happened. We were just sitting here, and this guy came out of nowhere," Justin cried on the phone. According to his statement, they had been approached by a lone assailant, an armed man demanding valuables. Justin claimed he and April had complied. But then, inexplicably, the man opened fire and fled into the night. He said he had been shot in the arm, but was still conscious and capable of making the call. The dispatcher immediately dispatched law enforcement and paramedics to the scene. When deputies arrived, they found Justin slumped behind the wheel of his black SUV, parked along a desolate stretch of A1A coastal highway, about 4 miles from the beach access point he described, visibly shaken and bleeding. EMTs discovered 4 gunshot wounds, 2 in the shoulder, 1 in the chest, and 1 that had grazed his left hand. Although he was clearly injured, the wounds appeared superficial, more painful than life-threatening. His wallet and watch were still on him, a detail that struck first responders as odd, given the robbery scenario he'd described. Justin kept asking about April. "Please tell me she's okay," he reportedly repeated, eyes wide with what appeared to be disbelief. A search team was immediately dispatched to the location where Justin claimed the shooting occurred. Officers and rescue workers trudged through the dark dunes with flashlights, their beams slicing through the thick night air. April's parents were notified early that morning. For David and Ellen Parks, the news was incomprehensible. Their daughter, the same vibrant, determined woman they had raised with such care, was gone. When detectives arrived to deliver the news in person, Ellen collapsed into David's arms. Their grief was total. Ellen later described that moment as feeling like the world had been yanked out from beneath our feet. April didn't live a dangerous life. She wasn't involved in risky behavior. She had no enemies. The idea that she had been murdered in cold blood on a Florida beach seemed like something out of a movie. Impossible. Surreal. Her colleagues at work were stunned when they heard the news. April had spoken fondly of the upcoming trip and had even mentioned how much she hoped it would bring them closer again. No one could have imagined that those would be among her final words. She was described as warm, driven, and fiercely loyal. A woman who believed in second chances, even when they weren't deserved. April's body was discovered about 30 feet from the beach access path, lying motionless on the sand. She had been shot once in the head, as Justin had described, and there was no sign of life. Her body showed no defensive wounds, no signs of struggle. She was still wearing her jewelry, earrings, a bracelet, and her wedding ring. Her purse was found nearby, untouched. Nothing appeared to be missing, which only deepened the mystery. The scene lacked the usual signs of a robbery gone wrong. As investigators surveyed the area, they found no shell casings, no footprints suggesting a third party had fled, and no witnesses reported hearing or seeing anything suspicious that night. In fact, most of the nearby houses were dark and quiet, their occupants fast asleep. The silence on the beach, investigators would later say, was almost unnerving. Adding to the confusion, investigators noted the precision of the gunshot wound, singular, direct, instantly fatal. This wasn't the frenzied, chaotic violence typical of a panicked thief. Instead, it seemed clinical, as if someone had planned it to be clean and quick, without mess. It was the kind of detail that stayed with the forensic team long after they left the scene. In the hours following the discovery of her body, Justin Barber was rushed to Shands Hospital in Jacksonville for treatment. Doctors cleaned and bandaged his wounds. He was interviewed by detectives while sedated, but he insisted on telling his story. The man had come out of nowhere, he said. He'd pointed the gun at them. Justin claimed he tried to protect April, but the man fired before he could react. In his telling, he had tried to fight off the attacker, but the man was too quick. He shot Justin, then April, and vanished into the darkness. At first glance, the scene appeared to be a random act of violence, a tragic, senseless attack in an otherwise peaceful beach town. Justin's story seemed plausible. It was entirely possible that they had been targeted by a stranger, someone desperate enough to carry out such a violent act. The investigation into April Barber's murder began with the kind of confusion and uncertainty that often surrounds high-profile cases. Initially, detectives had no reason to suspect foul play within the couple's dynamic. After all, Justin Barber's initial account of events seemed plausible. He was the surviving victim after all. Outwardly, he seemed like the grieving widower, wounded, both physically and emotionally. He wore his hospital bandage like a symbol of suffering, speaking softly when he gave statements and attending April's memorial service with a subdued presence. The idea that they were attacked by a random assailant appeared, at first, to be a reasonable theory. However, as the investigation unfolded, a series of clues began to expose a far darker truth that would shake the foundation of everything investigators believed. As daylight broke, the beach was sealed off as a crime scene. Forensics teams scoured the area for evidence. Drones and canine units were deployed to search for signs of a fleeing suspect. But after hours of combing the area, the results were the same. Nothing. No shell casings, no third-party footprints, no fingerprints other than those belonging to April and Justin. No signs of a struggle or chase. The shooter, if one existed, had vanished without a trace. Local news outlets ran headlines about the tragic murder of a young wife on a Florida beach. Public sympathy poured in. People donated to April's memorial fund, sent flowers to her grieving parents, and called for police to find the killer. For a time, Justin was seen as a surviving victim of a brutal, unexplained crime. In the first few days after the crime, detectives worked meticulously to reconstruct the events of that fateful evening. Crime scene experts combed over the beachside parking lot where April was found, and forensic analysis of the car became a focal point. The initial examination of the vehicle raised immediate red flags. The lack of forced entry and the absence of any signs of struggle suggested that the car had been staged in a way that contradicted Justin's description of a random attack. Moreover, the position of the bullet wounds on April's body raised further questions. Forensic ballistics revealed that the shots that killed April were fired at close range, and they appeared to have been inflicted in a manner that indicated she was not shot by someone standing outside the car, as Justin had claimed. The angle of the gunshot suggested that April had been sitting in the car when she was killed, her assailant firing from within the vehicle itself. This was a stark contradiction to Justin's version of events, where he described being attacked by a stranger who had approached the car from outside. Surveillance footage from the day of the murder showed the couple arriving at the beach much later than Justin had originally claimed. Cell phone records indicated multiple calls from Justin's phone in the hours leading up to the crime, some to contacts that detectives would later identify as women with whom he was involved. In fact, as forensic analysts dug into Justin's email and browsing history, they found evidence that Justin was not the faithful husband he portrayed to the public. Investigators began re-examining the physical wounds Justin had sustained. He had been shot 4 times, but none of the wounds had hit a major artery, organ, or bone. Forensic pathologists concluded that the angles of the wounds and the shallow depth of the bullets were consistent with self-inflicted injuries. One wound, to the shoulder, had an odd trajectory that would have required the shooter to stand behind and slightly above him, unless, of course, he had shot himself using a mirror or outstretched arm. Tests for gunpowder residue on Justin's hands and clothing came back inconclusive, but hinted at recent firearm discharge. As investigators continued to dig deeper into Justin's background, they discovered troubling patterns that hinted at a motive. Financial records revealed that Justin was in deep debt. His business ventures had all failed, and his personal finances were in complete disarray. His credit cards were maxed out, and he was facing a number of lawsuits from creditors. He had recently applied for several loans and had been denied due to his poor financial standing. It became clear that Justin had been living beyond his means, and his inability to secure a stable financial future only added pressure to an already volatile situation. But it wasn't just his finances that raised suspicion. The discovery of the life insurance policy on April's life was the pivotal moment in the investigation. Just months before her death, Justin had taken out a $1.5 million policy on April without her knowledge. The policy, which named him as the beneficiary, had been paid in full just weeks before the murder. Detectives soon uncovered that the couple's relationship had been anything but perfect. While Justin had painted a picture of a happy marriage in his initial statements, evidence suggested otherwise. Friends and family of April revealed that the couple's finances were a constant point of contention between them. April had been increasingly concerned about their growing debt, and she had started questioning Justin about his spending habits. There were several instances when April had discussed her concerns with close friends, and even mentioned that she was unsure about going through with the wedding, though she had never voiced these concerns directly to Justin. Her reluctance to discuss the issue in depth was seen as an effort to avoid conflict, but the tension between them was palpable. The more detectives learned about Justin's behavior after April's death, the more suspicious it became. He filed for the life insurance payout almost immediately, rushing to collect the money. His attempts to make a claim on the policy raised eyebrows, and it became evident that Justin was far more interested in securing the payout than in mourning the loss of his wife. The breakthrough in the investigation came when detectives reviewed the 911 call Justin made on the night of the murder. Listening to the call over and over again, investigators began to notice inconsistencies in Justin's statements. He initially described the shooter as a young man in his 20s, yet he could not provide a detailed description of the suspect. Furthermore, he gave conflicting accounts about the timeline of events, including how he and April had been positioned in the car at the time of the shooting. The more investigators listened to his statements, the more they suspected that Justin's story was a fabrication designed to cover up his role in the murder. As the weeks passed, detectives worked tirelessly to build their case. They spoke to people who had known Justin and April, trying to piece together a picture of their relationship in the months leading up to the murder. It became increasingly clear that Justin was struggling both financially and emotionally, and his desperation seemed to have driven him to the unthinkable. Forensic experts also began to examine phone records and computer data in an effort to uncover any evidence of Justin's premeditation. What they found was chilling. Justin had searched online for information about life insurance fraud, and there was a disturbing pattern of research into how to stage a crime to make it appear as though a random assailant was responsible for the death. Then came the biggest twist of all. In the trunk of Justin's vehicle, the one he had driven bleeding to the side of the road after the shooting, investigators found a towel soaked with blood wrapped around a partially used roll of duct tape and an empty ammunition box. It had been stashed under a false bottom panel. When tested, the blood on the towel matched both Justin and April's DNA. Detectives now believed they had uncovered a crime kit, tools for staging the scene, cleaning up, or perhaps finishing the job if it hadn't gone as planned. At this point, the momentum of the case had shifted completely. Justin Barber was no longer a possible victim. He was a man of means, motive, and method, a husband who had plotted to kill his wife, staged a fake robbery, and tried to pass himself off as a survivor of random violence. The motive was glaring: financial gain. With millions in insurance money, Justin could pay off his debts and start a new life, possibly with one of the women he had been courting behind April's back. Still, there was one last hurdle. Justin hadn't been arrested. The investigation, while deeply suspicious, hadn't yet crossed the line into a courtroom-quality case. Prosecutors wanted more. They needed airtight evidence, forensic, digital, behavioral, that could eliminate any doubt. They needed to be sure that a jury would see what they saw, not a grieving widower, but a cold-blooded killer. The next step would be building a timeline, minute by minute, of Justin and April's final hours. Investigators pulled credit card records, traced the couple's movements through cell tower pings, and began reconstructing what they were doing in the hours leading up to April's death. They discovered the pair had eaten dinner that night at a popular Jacksonville seafood restaurant. Waitstaff described them as quiet, perhaps tense, but nothing outwardly unusual. One server remembered April looking tired, but smiling politely. She tipped generously. That was April's nature, even in her final hours. From there, the timeline narrowed. GPS data from Justin's car showed they drove to a secluded spot on the beach, not a commonly accessed area. There was no evidence of other vehicles near that area during the time of the crime. Phone records showed that, despite Justin's claim that his phone had been damaged during the attack, it had still been pinging towers, including one several miles from the beach. After the time he claimed the shooting occurred, the time was ticking. And when investigators finally presented their full file to prosecutors in 2009, what followed would pull back the curtain on one of the most meticulously staged homicides in Florida's recent memory. The investigation had transformed from a tragic case of an apparent random act of violence to a meticulously planned murder driven by financial greed. What seemed like a senseless shooting in a quiet beachside parking lot was now revealed as a calculated execution, a husband's betrayal of his wife for money. But the detectives were not finished yet. They had gathered the evidence, and now it was time to bring Justin Barber to justice. The trial of Justin Barber for the murder of his wife, April, began in the fall of 2009, just over a year after her tragic death. The courtroom was filled with tension as the prosecution laid out its case, presenting evidence that painted a chilling portrait of a man driven by financial desperation and a desire for money, enough to orchestrate the brutal killing of his wife. The defense, however, remained steadfast in its claim that Justin had been the victim of a random attack, an innocent man caught in the crossfire of a senseless crime. They claimed that the inconsistencies in his statements were simply a result of the trauma he had experienced, and that his emotions had clouded his memory of the events. The defense attempted to cast doubt on the prosecution's evidence, suggesting that the forensic details were inconclusive, and that there was no direct evidence linking Justin to the crime. They tried to push the narrative that there were other possible explanations for April's death, including the possibility of a botched robbery or an accidental shooting by an unidentified third party. But as the days wore on, it became increasingly clear that the evidence stacked against Justin was overwhelming. Strategy quickly unraveled as the trial progressed. The prosecution brought forward a parade of witnesses who testified about Justin's increasingly erratic behavior in the days and weeks leading up to the murder. Friends and family members described how Justin had been visibly agitated, stressed about his financial situation, and growing more desperate as his debts piled up. April's friends testified that she had been increasingly concerned about their relationship, and had even expressed doubts about the wedding. Some spoke about how she had started talking about separating from Justin, though she had never fully confronted him about her fears. In the face of mounting evidence, Justin's behavior during the trial only further fueled the prosecution's case. The jury observed him closely, and his lack of visible remorse or emotion became a focal point. While other defendants in similar circumstances might have shown some degree of grief or sadness, Justin seemed more concerned with the proceedings themselves, more focused on his defense than on mourning his wife. At one point, he was even seen smiling and laughing with his attorneys during breaks in the trial, an action that did not go unnoticed by the jury. The life insurance policy also took center stage during the trial. The prosecution argued that it was no coincidence that Justin had taken out a substantial policy on April's life just months before her death, without her knowledge. The timing of the policy, combined with the fact that he was the sole beneficiary, pointed to a clear financial motive. The defense's attempt to downplay the significance of the life insurance policy fell flat in the face of such overwhelming evidence. The policy, they argued, wasn't just a safeguard, it was the key to understanding Justin's motive. As the trial neared its conclusion, the prosecution made its closing argument. They told the jury that Justin had plotted the murder of his wife with cold, calculated intent. They stressed the meticulousness of his plan, from staging the crime scene to creating a story about a random shooting, all designed to divert suspicion away from himself. In their view, Justin was not just a grieving husband, he was a murderer who had coldly eliminated his wife for financial gain. In the end, the jury deliberated for less than 2 days before returning with a verdict. The jury found that the evidence overwhelmingly pointed to Justin as the orchestrator of a carefully planned murder, driven by financial desperation and a desire to claim the life insurance payout. Justin Barber was found guilty of first-degree murder and fraud in the killing of his wife, April. The judge sentenced Justin to life in prison without the possibility of parole, recognizing the heinous nature of the crime and the calculated steps Justin had taken to end April's life. Justin's actions had shattered the lives of his family and friends, leaving them to cope with the horrific reality of how easily someone they trusted had betrayed them. For April's family, justice had been served, but the pain of losing a beloved daughter and sister would never fully heal.